Stanford University.
Okay, well, welcome to lecture number 7 of CS 193P. And today I'm going to have a brief slides. I hope it only takes me about 25 minutes because I got a pretty long demo. And today is all about the iPad. I'm going to give you a little bonus UI element of the week, which is UI toolbar. That's not just an iPad thing, but I'm going to show you briefly how that works. And every week now for the rest of the quarter, I'm going to kind of pick some random UI element and just talk to you about it. You could probably see that my lectures, they all build on one another, and I'm trying to keep them in bite-sized chunks. But sometimes there's just something that fits in, and so I'm just going to tell you about it. And then we're going to talk about iPad, split views, popovers, making a universal application that runs on both devices, and then I'm going to do the demo. The Friday section this week is about the AV Foundation framework. This is a pretty advanced optional lecture. It's going to be like right at the limit of, the base understanding that you have. But we thought it might be a good opportunity for you to see the kind of sophisticated frameworks that exist here, because so far all you've seen is pretty, we've kind of got straightforward stuff. So once you have delegation and all these callback mechanisms, you can build some pretty awesome frameworks. So that's going to be the Friday section. All right, right into the lecture here, UI toolbar. So you've seen toolbars on the iPhone and the iPad. I've shown a couple iPad ones here. They look kind of like a steel bar, usually on the top or on the bottom of the screen. The steel look is kind of the standard toolbar UI, so I kind of just mocked something up here. It kind of looks like that. But it is possible to put toolbars, to embed them at the top of views that are embedded deeper in your UI. For example, here's a toolbar that's at the top of what looks to be like an iBook-like app, the pages of a book. And at the top of a page, there's like a little toolbar with some buttons in there and a title and stuff like that. So the toolbar doesn't have to look steel. It can also look like that. A toolbar, all it is a collection of UI bar button items. Okay, this other class called UI bar button items. The UI bar button items aren't buttons. They act a lot like buttons, though. They're a little bit kind of simplified, somewhat simplified buttons. And I'll talk to you about how we create those in just another slide. But also I want you to notice that the navigation controller that we've learned about, it also has a toolbar at the bottom. Okay, now we haven't seen it because we haven't turned it on. We need to turn on that little switch. You see the switch over on the left there? That's the switch you get when you inspect a navigation controller in Xcode. You turn that little switch, show toolbar, and you'll get this bar on the bottom. But what's important to note about the navigation controller is that the buttons that appear in the toolbar is nothing to do with the navigation controller. It has to do with whichever view controller it's showing at the time. So as you slide, how we use push segues to push new things into the navigation controller. As you slide new things in, new buttons are going to appear on the bottom bar. So for example, here, let's say this is this looks like a psychologist view controller. And and at the bottom, it's got a little camera button, toolbar button there. And so if I were to click on a button and cause a push to happen and put a happiness view controller on there, well, then I'd get happiness view controller, that instance, buttons, okay? So there's a button down there. It has a button hello, and notice the camera one is gone. So how does this work? There's a method in UI view controller that you can override, or you can just, it's a property actually, and you can just set this property, which is toolbar items, and it's an NS array of UI bar button items, which I'm about to talk about. And so whenever your view controller gets pushed onto a navigation navigation controller, and that navigation controller has a toolbar at the bottom, you'll see your buttons. Okay, so it's really quite cool, easy, simple to use. If you press the back button there, of course, and we go back to the psychology view controller, we go back to the camera, right? Has the button down there. All right, UI bar button items. Let's talk about those, because this is really, the guts of what makes the UI toolbar work. They have target action, okay, just like a button. They're going to have a target action. That's how, when they're clicked, you find out about it. They can be bordered, like, well, I'll show you some examples, but they can be bordered or they can just be plain, kind of flat on a flat background. You can set the title of them to a text. You can set an image, some icon that you design or whatever. Or you can even set a view, your own little custom view in there. And there's a lot of built-in system ones, which I'm going to show you all of those in a second. And then there's two kind of special UI bar button items, which is fixed and flexible space. Okay? And those are used to kind of arrange on your UI toolbar how the buttons appear. And so here's some examples of that. So here is a UI toolbar that has a bunch of buttons on it, and it has flexible space buttons, right? UI bar buttons, there's flexible space on either side. And you can see that it took all the rest of the buttons and just centered them in the middle. Okay, so that's how you can use flexible space to do that. You could also use flexible space you put some items on the left and right, at the beginning and the end of your array. This is just an array of buttons. And then towards the middle, you put an item, like item, and on either side of it, you put flexible space. And what that does is center that item in the middle and push everything else to the side. Okay? Generally, you're not going to have more than 2 flexible spaces in a toolbar at a time. You kind of get interesting results when you do that, but generally not. And then, of course, you could just right align or left align all your buttons using the flexible space as well. While I've had these up here, I also showed you what a plain style looks like that item one is just plain style. It's like flat, has no border. And then bordered style, most of the rest of them up there are bordered style. And I'm also showing you all the system types up there, right? So edit, done, cancel. There's bookmarks, there's the play and pause over there, or play, pause, fast forward. There's compose, things you might expect, things that you see commonly. And so the way you create a UI bar button item is alloc init, and the init can either take the text or the image you want, or there's another one called init with bar button system item or something like that, and then you give it a enumerated type to specify one of these. And the documentation is quite good at explaining what they all are. I think these images are even embedded in the documentation. So to create a toolbar, super simple. You just drag it out into your view controller. Usually you'll wire it up to an outlet. Then you can just drag UI bar buttons out into it from Xcode, or in code you can set the array, the toolbar object has an array of the items. And that's it. It's really no more than just an array of these items. Okay? Super simple to use. And we're going to use it in the demo briefly today so you can get an idea how that works. All right. So now on to the iPad. And there's 2 big UI elements that are only on the iPad, which we're going to talk about today. One is split view, and the other one is popovers. Okay, so first we're going to talk about split views. You've probably seen them. Here's an example of some split views, what they look like. Your homework might look something like this, for example. And the way you create a split view controller is you just, again, drag it out in Xcode. You can only drag a split view into an iPad type storyboard. Storyboards are either iPad storyboards or iPhone storyboards. And if you have an iPhone storyboard up and you try to find a split view controller, it won't even be in the object library, let alone you're not able to draw it out. So make sure you have the right storyboard up when you're dragging it out. And I'm going to show you how to create multiple storyboards today in the demo. The split view is generally a base element only, like it fills the whole screen. You wouldn't have a split view inside of a navigation controller or inside of a popover or something like that. Generally, the split view is one of them, and it's for your whole app, generally. It might even be restricted to be that. I'm not 100% sure of that. The split view, as you saw, had 2 view controllers, kind of a left side and a right side. We call that the master, that's the left-hand side, and the detail, which is the right-hand side. That's just words we use, master and detail, left and right. You get and set these 2 things super simply. There's a property in split view controller called view controllers. It's an array. You would only ever have 2 items in this array, the left and the right. The left is the 0th element, and the right is the first element, is the 1th element, the first element. This is a settable thing, so you could in code set both your view controllers. Notice that the API is built for you to set them both at the same time, generally. Okay? But of course, you could get it, make it mutable, set one of them, and then set it. You could do all that if you wanted, but it's kind of trying to lead you toward doing this. But really, you set these 2 things in Xcode. Okay? You control drag from the left side to set your left one, and control drag to the right side to set the right one. And then if that's going to change, it's because of segues. Okay? You're usually segueing if you're going to change either of them. You notice just kind of ancillary API knowledge here. You notice that it's outside property non-atomic copy, not strong. Okay, why is that copy? That's for the same reason that when we gave away our program in our calculator brain, we copied it first. Okay, this API doesn't want you passing like a mutable array of the 2 view controllers and then expecting that if you change one later, after you've already given it to it, that it's going to update this split view somehow. So what it's saying here is, I'm going to copy what you give me, and that's what I'm going to use. So if you want to change it, you got to give me another one. You see what I'm saying? You see why we use copy? And you'll see copy used for NS arrays and NS strings pretty commonly throughout all of iOS, exactly because of this. They just don't want to give you the idea that if you pass a mutable one in, you can change it later and have anything happen. All right, so the split view really will not work without a delegate. Okay, so this is the first time you're seeing an object in iOS that requires a delegate to do what it does. All right. If you don't set a delegate, you're going to get this situation where when the split view goes into portrait mode, the left side is going to disappear, and you're supposed to put up a little button in the corner so that they can press it, and then the left side will appear in a popover. That's how split views work. But if you don't implement the delegate, you don't get that button, you can't put it up. So you're in this weird situation in portrait where you can't get at the left side. Okay, you can't access the left side. And we're going to see this in our demo as well. Usually you're going to set this delegate in this method viewDidLoad, or perhaps in awake from nib in your view controller. Remember, awake from nib is a method that's sent to every single object that comes out of a storyboard. You saw it with your view, right? UI view, it gets awake from nib, and we did the thing where we called setup both from init with frame and from awake from nib. Remember that? So view controllers get awake from nib also, and by the time awake from nib is called, which is pretty early in the game, like the thing had just come out of the storyboard, your split view controller will be associated with your view controller if it's control dragged into in Xcode. So awake from nib is another place, and we'll use awake from nib in our demo. So the main thing that the split view delegate is dealing with is rotation. So you got this split view, it's on screen, and if you're in landscape mode, usually, not always though, you have the left one on the left and the right one on the right. The left one's kind of narrow and the right one's a little wider, okay? And then if you go to portrait, something has to happen. Either you're going to keep them both on there and shrink them way down, which looks kind of funny, but works in some cases, like the settings on the iPad work that way, or you're just going to hide the left one and put it behind a little popover button. Right? It's also possible to have that little popover button both landscape and portrait. And so the delegate controls all that and does the button dance, what I call the button dance, right? Because you've got to take that button, put it in a toolbar, rotate it the other way, take it back out. Rotates back to portrait, put it back in. Okay? So we're going to talk about how to do the button dance today. In the demo, we'll do it. So the property, the delegate property, is very similar to that data source you had on your face view, right? It's a non-atomic assign. Now, assign is like weak, okay, only worse, because it doesn't do the zeroing business. Now, I was looking in the documentation in iOS 5, and it still seems like these delegates are assign, not weak, which is a little bit unfortunate. You want to be slightly careful here. It's not likely that would cause a problem for you, but the thing is you're not creating a strong pointer to the delegate, so if it got freed out of the heap, you could have a dangling pointer here with assign, because it's not weak. So weak is just, sign is like weak without the zeroing action. So be a little careful there. Like I say, the right side, the detail side, it's always visible in the split view controller, always. No matter what the rotation, no matter what your delegate's doing, it's always visible. So the delegate is really there to determine what happens on the left side. Okay, when does the left side appear, get hidden or not? Okay, so there's a method, first of all. This is the first delegate method you're learning. This method gets sent to your delegate to ask it, what do you want me to do with the left side in a certain orientation? So it passes you itself, almost always delegate and data source methods, the first argument's always going to be sender. So it's passes you itself, then it passes you the left side, because it's going to hide that side. And it asks you, in this orientation, what do you want me to do with it? And you return yes if you want to hide it and put it behind the little button, or no if you want it to stay on screen. Okay? So there's really three options here. You can say yes all the time, which means the left side never appears on the screen. It's always behind the button. In other words, you can only see the left side if you press that little button in the corner and it comes up in a popover. You can say no, which means the left and right are both always on screen all the time. Or, and I'll show you all these examples. So here is the yes. Okay, it's behind this little thing on the button every time. Then here is no. That means never hide it. So whether you're in landscape or portrait, it's showing both the left and right. Never hides the left. The left is the calculator part, right? Okay, see how they're both on thing? Or this is the default, which is when it's in landscape, show it, and when it's in portrait, hide it. Everyone understand this? So it's returning UI interface orientation is portrait. right? So it hides it when it's in portrait. So that's the default. If you don't implement method, that's what you get. And that's the problem if you don't implement the rest of the delegate methods, because in portrait, it's going to hide it, and you got to put that little button up there because it doesn't do it for you. It gives you the button, but you got to put it on screen. Okay. So yeah, if you forget to set the delegate, you're going to get this in portrait mode. No button up there in the corner, okay? So the rest of the split view delegate methods have to do with putting that button up there, okay? And there's two of them that are really important, and that's the showing one and the hiding one, okay? The one that you got to put the button up, and the one where you have to take the button back away because you rotated back to landscape, for example. And these are usually really easy to implement, but you got to implement them. So this is the one where it's going to hide the left-hand side, and it's giving you a bar button. You see the third argument is a bar button, and it's saying, put this bar button on the screen because I'm going to hide the left view controller. It'll automatically take care of when the bar button is pressed, showing the left side, okay? But you have to put the bar button somewhere. And then when the flip side happens, when you rotate back to landscape and it puts the left back on the screen, it's going to send you this message, which is invalidate that bar button. In other words, take it out of your toolbar, okay? Because you wouldn't want to be in landscape with the calculator showing on the left and the button above the right-hand side, the toolbar to the right side. That would be a weird state, okay? So this is going to do it. So that's basically it. It's as simple as that. You've got to put the button on, take the button away. So here is, I've given you, first of all, I should say there's a lot of ways to implement split views, okay, delegates, a lot. And it all just kind of depends on what kind of view controllers you have on both sides. You might have navigation controllers in one side and something with a toolbar on the other side. It's just really up to you how to do it. So when I give you some examples of how you would do this, it's just more to give you a feel for how it would be done rather than saying, oh, this is the way you implement a split view delegate, okay? So here's, for example, but I will say two things about when you're setting up your delegate. One, you got to decide who's going to be the delegate. Is it going to be the master, the guy on the left, or is it going to be the guy on the right? And both of them are reasonable choices. It really depends. I try to choose the view controller or a view controller that's going to be in the split view all the time, okay? It's never going to not be part of the split view, like it's not going to get replaced or something like that. I try to keep one that's keep around it, but even if it's replaced, you can set the delegate anew once it's replaced if you want, but that's generally what I try to do, is pick one of the two. Also, you got to think about reusability. One of the two might be kind of generic, and so you can't implement the split view delegate there. It's some generic reusable view, and you could subclass it, I guess, and do it, but the other one might be very specific to your app, and so putting it in there might make sense. It's really up to you. But here's an example where okay, but in the detail side is the guy who has to put the button up, though. Okay? The button is always on the detail side, right? You agree with that statement? Because when you rotate to portrait, it's the only one visible sometimes. So it has to be the one that puts the little button in its toolbar. So here's an example of a method in a detailed view controller that would set this bar button. So you can imagine this method would be called with the bar button from one of the delegate methods and with nil from the other one to clear it out. And all it does is it gets its toolbar, which is probably an outlet. You get it other ways, but it's probably an outlet. And then it's going to get a mutable copy of that toolbar's array of UI bar button items. If the split view bar button that it already has, this is a property, so I already have underbar split view bar button item. If the one I already have is, if I have one, if it's not nil, then I'm going to remove it from the toolbar's array of bar button items. And then the new one, as long as it's not nil, I'm going to insert it at the left. So this particular set split view bar button item would insert the little bar button in the upper left, the leftmost part of the toolbar. No matter what else is in the toolbar, this is just going to insert it on the left. Okay? Then I just set the toolbar's items to be this mutable version that I just modified, and then I store the thing in the instance variable that goes along with this property. Everyone understand this code? Any questions about that? We'll use this in the demo too, so you can see it at work. So you've got the master and you've got the detail. The master is called the master and the detail is called the detail because usually you're clicking things in the master and the detail is showing you the details of what you're clicking, right? That is 99% of the time you use split view. So how does that detail get updated when something changes in the master? And the answer is there's two choices. One, simple target action, okay? So you got buttons or something in your left master view, like your calculator, and when things are clicked, it's sending target action messages to your controller, the master controller, and when it wants to update the detail, it just sends a message to the detail. Now, I'm going to show you how it gets to the detail from the master in a second. It's quite simple. In fact, I'm going to show you right now. So here's, for example, a target action message in the master view controller called doIt. And it gets the detail controller by using this special method in UI view controller called self.splitViewController. Okay, it's a property on UI view controller. It always returns the split view controller you're in, if you're in one. Okay? Remember we saw self.navigation controller last lecture. That always returns a navigation controller if you're in one. Could self.navigation controller return non-nil and self.splitViewController controller return non-nil? Anyone guess? Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, it could. Because you could be the master and you could have a navigation controller inside the split view controller. So self.navigation controller would return the little navigation controller you're in. Self.splitViewController controller would return the split view controller you're in. Even if you're in a navigation controller and you're pushed off screen, okay, you're upstream from the current one, you're still in the split view controller. It will still return non-nil. It's not about being on screen. It's about being in the UI structure. And if you're in a navigation controller and the back button would get to you somehow, you're still in the split view. So anyway, so you get your detail view controller just by getting the last object out of the split view controller's array. Remember that array only has 2 things in it, so you're just going to get the last one. And then you're going to set some properties in it, and it's going to update. That's it. There's nothing else you have to do, right? Hopefully the set some property method inside the detail view controller, whatever it is, updates itself, says set needs display on its views or whatever it needs to do. And that's it. So target action, really simple, straightforward way to do it. But you can also segue. Okay, so this is a little more complicated. So here, there's only one kind of segue that works in a split view controller. It's called a replace segue. Replace. And that's because it replaces either the detail or the master. Very unusual to replace the master with a segue. You could imagine in rare circumstance, but let's focus on thinking about replacing the detail. So for example, in our psychologist example, remember we had Dr. Pill, and Dr. Pill, depending on which answer you gave, sometimes a different view, a different scene, really, appeared, got pushed, right? Because we had one scene that had a little go to Dr. Pill's website button in it. Remember that from last time, hopefully, because we're going to look at it again today. So there's a case where you might want to replace the detail view with a new one that has that button in it. And then if you click on another button, you want to replace it back with the other one, okay? So that's where replace comes in. There is an interesting warning with replace. It's the little red be careful right there. When you replace the detail view, if it has the little split view bar button in the toolbar, that toolbar gets replaced, of course, because your whole view is going to be replaced. So you've got to transfer that split view bar button, the little one that brings up the, that you were given to the delegate and brings up the little popover. You got to transfer it to the new one. And you usually do that in your prepare for segue, right? So you're in prepare for segue, it's a replace segue, you ask the detail guy for his existing little bar button, and then you set the bar button in the thing, and then let the segue happen. That make sense? So I'm going to show you code to do that as well. That's a little bit of a complication with replace. Luckily, target action. And like in your homework, use target action. Really, really simple. Okay, that's split view controller. All right, popovers. Now, popovers are there's a UI popover controller class in iOS. It's not a UI view controller. It's not UI popover view controller. It's UI popover controller. Okay, so it's just an NS object, but it does control a view controller, and it basically just draws its view controller, which you set with this property content view controller. That's a property of UI popover controller, and you set that, and it draws a rectangle with that view controller in it, with a little arrow pointing to whatever brought it up, okay? It's super straightforward, okay? That's how you do popover. And usually the contents of a popover happens because you control drag to it and there's a segue, okay? So there's a popover segue, and what the popover segue does is you control drag it to a view controller, it takes that view controller and puts it in a popover, all right? And whatever you dragged from, a button or whatever, that's what the popover is going to point to. All right. When you get prepare for segue with a popover segue, the argument to prepare for segue is going to be a UI storyboard popover segue class. Okay, so you'll have to is kind of, or you know, maybe you just assume when you name your segue, you're just going to assume that it's always a popover segue. You can then cast, you do an is kind of, I recommend, and then do a cast, and then you can access the segue property popover controller, and then now you'll have the popover controller, all right, that's involved in this segue. You can put popovers on screen not with segues, not rare, but not usual either. You do it with alloc init with content view controller. So you do alloc init with content view controller, give it the view controller that you want to be inside the popover, and then you need to put it on screen, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. You can also ask a popover controller, is this popover currently visible? Right, with the popover visible property. All right, so if you make a popover in code, or actually if you use a storyboard, remember the storyboard method instantiate view controller with identifier that gives you a view controller out of a storyboard. So either way, if you get a view controller, then you send a message to UI popover controller, alloc init with that view controller. Now you got a popover controller in your hand. You send it one of these two messages to make it appear on screen. This is if you don't use a segue. Okay? You can either present the popover from a little rectangular area, maybe some selected text or some view or something like that, or a button, like the frame of a button, something like that, or you can present it from a bar button item. It's very common for popovers to appear when you click on bar button items, so you just pass the bar button item. Notice this argument here, permitted arrow direction. The popover, you might ask, if I say this, from a popover, from a bar button or from a rectangular area, where's it going to put it on screen? And the answer is it's going to put it wherever it can fit it, but it will try to use your permitted arrow direction to decide whether it's going to put it to the left or put it below. So if you don't permit the arrow direction left, then it won't try to put it left. It'll try to put it below or one of the other arrow directions. And I think if it can't fit it, though, it's going to put it somewhere on screen. Right? If it'll fit it on screen at all, it'll fit it on there somewhere. So the arrow is going to be somewhere. So this is giving the guidance of where to put it. Really subtle thing to be careful of here, which is you got to keep a strong pointer to your popover controller. All right, presenting it by calling one of these present things doesn't cause anybody to grab a strong pointer to your popover controller. So a lot of people write code like this. You see the popover, present popover thing? They say, oh, UI popover alloc init with view controller, and they say popover present from bar button item, and that's the end of that method. And then their program crashes later. And they're like, what? What happened? Well, the answer here, the reason it crashes is because the UI popover, the only strong pointer it had was this local variable UI popover controller star pop. And when that went out of scope of this method, now nobody had a strong pointer to the UI popover controller. So you almost always create a property in your object when it puts up a popover controller, right? A strong property. Some @sign property, non-atomic strong UI popover controller star my popover or whatever. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so dismissing a popover. You got a popover on screen. Now you want to dismiss it, get it off screen. Well, usually the user does it, okay? But there's two ways they might do it. One, if they touch anywhere else on screen besides in the popover, it will dismiss that popover. Unless they tap on a view that is in this array of pass-through views that you can pass to the popover. So in other words, you can make it so that there are certain places on the screen outside the popover that if the user touches on it, it doesn't dismiss the popover. You could even make it the whole screen. Then they can only dismiss the popover by touching something in the popover. Now, when you touch something in the popover, how does it get dismissed? The answer there is dismiss popover animated is called on the popover. Now, another subtlety here, you do not want to be calling dismiss popover animated from the view controller that's in the popover. Okay, and this is very strong temptation. You've got an OK button in that view controller. You click OK, and it says, oh, dismiss popover animated. But really, that view controller, for example, there's no, whatever view controller, let's back up. Whatever object puts that popover up, calls present or segued to it, okay, that object, or some object that owns that object, should be the one that dismisses it. So how does it work then to have an OK button inside of a popover? The answer is you're going to use delegation a lot. So the view controller that's inside a popover is usually going to have a property, which is its delegate. And when OK is pressed in that view controller, it's going to send a message to its delegate saying, OK, or I did it, or whatever. And then the thing that put it up is going to dismiss it. Okay, now this might seem like, wow, that's an extra level of indirection. I got to create this delegate just to say OK and dismiss it. But it's just more object-oriented because it makes the thing inside the popover not have to know that it's in a popover, right? It could be presented other ways. It could be pushed in a navigation controller. It could be, presented modally, reused in other ways. And so this is something that probably you'll get confused about, but it's something to note. Put it in your head right now. You'll see it with later assignments too. It's going to ask you to do this right. So the thing that presents something dismisses it. That's the take home here. The popover does have a delegate. It's not used that much. The main thing it tells you about is dismissal. So it actually has two methods. One asks you whether it should dismiss something, and then this one gets sent to you when it's actually dismissed. But this only happens if the popover is dismissed by someone clicking outside the popover. Okay, you don't get this if someone calls dismiss popover animated. Okay, so this is basically user dismissed popover controller is what this is. All right, the popover size. Okay, popover is going to come on screen. How big is it going to be? Well, there's three ways to set the size. One, the most common way, is you set it in Xcode. Okay, if you pick a view controller and you inspect it, in the attributes inspector, you're going to see at the bottom there's a little switch called popover. And if you switch that on and say use explicit size, you can specify the size that that view controller will be when it's in a popover. Whenever it's in a popover, it will be that size. Okay? But that's a little restrictive. You might have a view controller that's sometimes in a big popover, sometimes you want it in a smaller popover, for example. So there's the method in UI view controller called content size in popover. Okay, it's a method in UI view controller. You override it, and you return a CG size that says how big you want to be in a popover. And it can calculate that size. It could know some context. A lot of things could be happening there to do that. The third way is there is a method on UI popover controller that says set the size of this popover. Okay? But this is really not very object-oriented. The view controller that's inside the popover, it's more likely to know what size it wants to be than some external agent. But it's possible that the external agent knows a little about more what's going on outside the popover, and so it can pick a good size. Does that make sense? So there's three separate ways to set the size. You can pick whichever is appropriate. All right, universal applications. I'll make this quick. A universal application is a single binary, a single application that will run on iPad or iPhone and do a different thing on each. Okay? Shares a lot of the view controller code, but the UIs look different because they're going to use split views and popovers instead of navigation controllers and things like that. You create one either by when you saw when we create a new application, one of the choices in the very first screen is you want this to be universal or iPhone and iPad. We've always picked iPhone so far. But if you have one that's already an iPhone app, for example, your current homework assignment, you can go to the Summary tab. And you'll see this when I do the demo where this is, but it's in the Summary tab. You click on your project, then you click on your target, your application, and then you go to the Summary tab, and that's the same pop-up you saw in Creation, and you can just switch it to Universal, and boom, you got a universal application. Once you do that, though, you're going to want to set a different storyboard for the two platforms, and we'll show you how to do that. So you're in your code, and you want to do something that's iPad specific. How do I find out that I'm running on an iPad? Okay, so here's the magic, how to do that. You call this macro UI underbar, user underbar interface underbar idiom, and you ask if it's equal to user interface idiom pad versus user interface idiom phone. And that'll tell you whether you're running on an iPad. Now, this is not a first resort. It's maybe not the last resort, but it's really not the first thing you want to think to do. It might be better to say, am I in a split view controller? Because if I'm in a split view controller, then I want to do certain things versus whether I'm on an iPad. So if you're going to say if I'm in an iPad, make sure that you're really testing, am I in an iPad versus testing, oh, am I in a split view controller? Right? You can always tell if you're in a split view controller by saying self.splitViewController, for example. Now, some things are contingent upon being in a split view controller, other things are contingent about just being on the iPad, and you have to make a decision what semantically is going on. Some other conditionals that you might do is, am I on screen right now? Okay, because in a split view, you might be on screen, because both those views are on screen. Whereas on a phone, you might be in a navigation controller, you're not on screen right now. So here's how you can find out if a view is on screen. You send the view the method window. And if that comes back nil, it's not on screen. Okay? Very simple way to tell whether a view is on screen. And you can tell whether a view controller's view is on screen by saying self.view. Self.view is a property on view controller, I think I mentioned it before, that returns the top level view in your view controller. So if that's not on screen, then the whole view controller is not currently on screen. Okay, so that's a good thing to test across platforms. You can also see how big the screen is. This is probably somewhat of a last resort. Probably wouldn't want to check exact screen size. They're always coming out with new devices with different screen sizes, but you might check to see if the number of bits is over a certain threshold or something possibly. One other thing to be careful of on different platforms, because even on the iPhone there's two different platforms. There's the Retina display ones and the normal display ones. And the Retina displays have really high resolution, 2 pixels per point, horizontally and vertical, 4 pixels overall per point. So you want to know about that, and especially in your homework, number 3, you're going to want to know, okay, because your graph is going to want to draw as high resolution as it can. So it's going to want to be iterating over pixels, not over points. You don't want it to be blocky point thing on a Retina display. But you got to do the right thing on both platforms. So you're going to want to use this view method content scale factor, which will get you how many pixels per point. Okay? All right. That's it. A lot of this, when you see a demo, it's going to be a lot better than just jabbering about it. And this is a time-constrained demo, so let's get right to it. What we're going to do is we're going to take Psychologist and make it a universal app. Okay, so we're going to have to make an iPad version of it. What to watch for here? I'm going to create a second storyboard, an iPad storyboard, and we're going to build it up. It's just going to be split view based. It's going to have a popover in it, etc. Before I do that, though, I'm going to fix the strings and struts a little bit on the Psychologist for the iPhone, because I want to make it so it rotates properly in landscape, which it currently doesn't do at all. And another thing to watch here is how we communicate between the left, the master side of the Psychologist app, which is going to be the psychologist, like Dr. Freud or Dr. Pill, they're going to be on the left, and the right side, the big side, which is the diagnosis, okay, the happy face. Right, so watch how we're going to communicate those way. And then the main thing that's going to take most of the time of the demo is doing the split view delegate, controlling what appears on screen when in our split view. All right, I'm going to do all my demos today on the device. That's why you're seeing both of them up here. So it'll take a little bit longer because it's going to have to download to the device each time, but figured it might be kind of fun to do it that way since we haven't done that so far. So let's get Xcode up here. I have the Psychologist. This is the Psychologist, just as we left it last time. Here's its storyboard, if you'll remember. And so I told you I was going to fix the rotation first. So before I do that, let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to, instead of running this in the simulator, I'm going to run this on the iPad, and let's see what happens. Okay, this is an iPhone-only app, and I'm trying to run it here on an iPad. So what's it going to do? And the answer is, it runs it in this iPhone emulation mode. I don't know how to get that to switch. Here, it's working here. So let's try rerunning that actually, because I think I started it in this weird mode. Okay, so yeah, let's try this. Okay, so it runs it in this mode. And when you run it in this mode, you'll notice that in the corner is a little 2x button, the lower right-hand corner. I don't know how well you can see it. If you press it, it makes all the bits twice as big, so it's kind of grainy. It's not really doing the Retina display thing. It's just making it bigger. But here you can see that it works just like it did on the device, right? We have our 2 docs. We even have this. We have go to Dr. Pill's website. I think I have a network connection here. Maybe not. Yeah, I guess I don't. Oh, yeah, there it is. So here we're going. This is Dr. Pill's website. Looks a lot like your class website. Okay, so and even, I'm doing the touch thing here, so that's working. So everything's working here. It's great. However, when I do rotation, okay, kind of looks ugly. And what's worse, when I go back here, this isn't rotated. Okay, so that's bad. So let's go ahead and, it's not, it looks rotated on your screen, but it's not really rotated. You see it sideways. So we want that to be in landscape too. So how are we going to do that? Well, there's two things we need to do to make that work. One, we got to fix the struts and springs on the ones that are properly rotating. So for example, here's Dr. Pill, and he's got these things. And if we look at the struts and springs for this, like let's look at this button right here. Okay, it's struts and springs. It's sticking to the upper left. How about if we have it stretch and stick to both sides? So let's have all the buttons do that. Right? And I also notice that's not really lined up. And then this one too. Okay, so now when we rotate this thing, it'll look better. And let's do the same thing down here. Make this guy look good. Not vertically. Whoops. Sorry. Like that. And this thing. And this. And this. Okay, so that's good. That's simple as that. We just fix when they go to landscape, they'll look a lot better. The happiness view controller looked fine in landscape. I guess we didn't go there, but we know it rotates because we made it so that it'll rotate each way. But fixing this one over here is a little more difficult because what class is this view controller? It's class UI view controller. Right? We don't have a subclass here. It's just a plain thing. So we really need to make a subclass here, and all we're going to do in that subclass is override that method should auto rotate to user interface rotation. Remember that? Okay, so that's really easy to do. We're just going to go up here and create a new class. We do that with new file, remember. It should be a quick review for you. It's a UI view controller subclass. I'm going to call it rotatable view controller. So I'm going to try and make this and keep this a generic class that I could reuse in another app. So I'm going to try and make it so this class knows nothing about psychologists or happiness. Okay, it's going to be a reusable class. Just to kind of show you design-wise that that's a good goal, is to have these reusable classes. So we'll make sure we put it in the right place. Here we go. We got our rotatable view controller. Here it is. I'm going to delete everything out of here except the should auto rotate. And I'm just going to say yes. So I'm going to allow this view controller to rotate to any orientation. Okay? So now I go back to my storyboard, and I need to do two things. One, I need to set this to be a rotatable view controller. Right? I'm just inspecting it. This is the inspector for this view controller. And we got to get the struts and springs for this thing right, too. So let's do the same thing there. Put this up a little bit. That. And you can play around with the struts and springs to make them work the way you want. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run this. Stop. And let's see what happens here. Okay, we're still in iPhone mode. So we're in this simulation, iPhone simulation mode, basically. So now, when I rotate this, it's working. Okay, you see how it's gotten wider. And also now, as I navigate through here, these things are working. And if I switch them back, right, celebrity, this thing's working. So now I have an app that truly works with the rotation. Okay? Everybody seeing that okay? Question?
Can you set the struts and springs of multiple objects at once?
The question is, can you set struts and springs with multiple objects at once? You might be able to. Try it. I don't really remember whether you can. You can definitely select multiple objects. You probably can. You probably can. I'm not 100% sure of that. Well, here we are. Let's see. Shift. Let's see if that worked. Yeah, so you can. Okay, so there you go. All right, so that's all I wanted to do in iPhone mode. So now we're going to switch over to making this a universal application that supports the iPad as well. And all we need to do this is to go to our project. Here it is. And click on the target. Okay, project, target, summary. And you're going to see that there's kind of application features. Now, I told you at the beginning of the class that we were going to talk about these, and so now we're going to start talking about them. The most important one right here for us today is devices. We're going to change this to universal. Now, nothing's really going to happen in your app per se, and in fact, if I just run my app right now, after just switching that one thing, different stuff is going to happen. Okay? Notice that it's not going to bring this up in iPhone emulation mode anymore. Okay? It brings it up in this giganto mode, all right, which is not what we want either. See, this is kind of ugly, but it's different. It's definitely different. Okay, but what's going on here? What's happening is we're using the same storyboard for the iPhone and for the iPad as we are on the iPhone. And you can see it's not really appropriate. That's really not an appropriate UI on the iPad. So we need to create a new storyboard for our iPad. So how are we going to do that? Firstly, what I'm going to do is rename my existing storyboard. You can see it right here. It's called main storyboard.storyboard. I'm going to call it iPhone.storyboard. Just so that I'm clear in my mind. Oh yeah, this is for my iPhone. All right? And when I go back over here, I'm also going to have to change it here. So this is the summary, same place we just were where we changed this to universal. And you can see that this is where I set my storyboard for the iPhone. And then scrolling down, here's where I set it for the iPad. Right? So I can set the storyboard that's used on each of them separately. So let's change this one to iPhone. And we want to change this one to iPad. So we got to go create an iPad storyboard. So how do we create a new storyboard? We just go up here, new file. It seems like that's where we go to create everything new, right? New file. But we're not really going to, it's not a class or anything we're creating. We're going down here to user interface and see where it says storyboard. This is how we create a new storyboard. So we're going to hit next. This is critically important. Pick iPad right here. Because whether a storyboard for the iPad or the iPhone is determined at creation time. Okay? So if you don't pick iPad here, you won't be able to do things like drag split view controllers out. Let's put it in the right place. This tends to try to put it in the wrong place, so we're going to put it there. And let's call this one iPad. Okay? So this is going to be our iPad storyboard. So you can see it's added our iPad storyboard here right next to our iPhone storyboard, and it's completely empty. Okay? Starts out completely empty. So on the iPad, what are we going to do? I said we're going to have the psychologist on the left and the happiness on the right of a split view controller. So we're going to start right off by dragging out a split view controller. So if we look in the object window, you'll see split view controller right there. If we switch to our iPhone storyboard, by the way, notice it goes away. I can't even drag a split view controller out, and that makes sense. So bring a split view controller out here. Now, when you drag this split view controller out, it very conveniently for you kind of gives you here a navigation controller for the left side and a little table view controller. We want the navigation controller because we still want to choose Dr. Pill or Dr. Freud and then have the navigation controller go over and then ask the right questions. But we don't want this table. You see this table? So I'm just going to select it and hit delete to get rid of that table. Okay? But otherwise, I have a split view controller here, and it's got a left side and a right side. Okay? Now, the right side is supposed to be a happiness view controller. If I inspect it, you can see that it's right now just a plain UI view controller. But I can fix that easily just by setting it to happiness view controller. The happiness view controller needs that face view. So let's just go ahead and grab a view and do the face view. I'm kind of doing this to show that you can build a different kind of scene for the two platforms. They don't have to be the same. So here I'm building this. Let's put this in here. Let's make sure it, like in the corner there, sorry, with small screen here. Let's make sure we get this right. Oops. Okay, so did I get that right there? No, I didn't. It's hard for me to see on this screen, sorry. All right, so this is our face view. So let's make sure we set its type. It doesn't want to be plain view. It wants to be a face view. And then finally, really importantly, let's set our outlets and actions. So that's one way to build your new UI for your storyboard, is just kind of build it again, build the scenes again. And I did that to show that you can do that, but sometimes you won't want to do that. You'll want to basically copy and paste your controllers from the other side, and we'll do that for some of these other controllers. So that's that side. Now we have to do the other side, the master side over here. And how are we going to do that? Let's go ahead and do the copy and paste actually right now to show you how to do that. So I'm going to go over to the iPhone. And let's start with this guy. So I'm just selecting this view controller right here. I'm saying copy. I'm going to go back here and hit paste. Oops, sorry, paste. And it's going to put it on here. Sorry for the scrolling here. Notice it's really, really big, so it kind of iPadized it. But when I set it as the root view controller of this navigation controller, which I'm just holding down Control and dragging. Okay, see, I'm not doing a segue though, I'm doing this relationship view because this is the same thing we did last time. It'll resize it because it knows that it's going to be inside that navigation controller. Okay, so we got this. we need the rest of our stuff. Let's go back to our iPhone here. Let's grab some of these other guys. How about Dr. Freud right here? So I'm going to just select him, copy, go back here, click here, paste. It can be a little bit frustrating when you're copying and pasting because you have to be careful not to have any objects selected in the side you're pasting in. So this is Dr. Freud, so he needs a segue from here. Okay, this is Dr. Freud's one. And again, we're inside a navigation controller here, so this is the same segue you're used to, a push. All right, so we're going to push that guy on. And same thing here. We'll go ahead and grab Dr. Pill, who's right here. All right, we'll copy, go over here, and paste. Oops, paste. And same thing, control drag, right here to push. All right, so we're making good progress here. Let's go ahead and run this as is. Did I hit play? Yes, I did. All right, so now we're going to run it. Hopefully we'll get a better, more appropriate iPad UI. Oh, we didn't. Why didn't we get that? Maybe because, oh, I know why. Sorry, so we did this beautiful job of building this iPad storyboard. We never set that to be the storyboard for our iPad. Okay, this is a common mistake. You'll probably do this on your homework too. Okay, got to go back here, go to Psychologist. And for iPad, we don't want to use the iPhone storyboard. We want the iPad storyboard. Okay, so let's try that. Okay. Okay, so now we're seeing a little bit better UI here. It's not a happy UI yet, but it does have a split view at least, left and right. And if we press on, I'm pressing on Dr. Freud, we get Dr. Freud's thing, and if we click on there, it crashes. Okay, why does it crash? Because we haven't implemented that part yet, all right? So Dr. Freud, we pressed on it, it tried to send the target action, it tried to segue. That segue doesn't exist in this storyboard. Everyone see why it crashed? Okay, because we had segues, our code is a segue. So let's go look at that code and fix it, for Dr. Freud at least. So here's our Psychologist code, and remember we have these 3 target action messages from the flying, the apple, and the dragons. And then we call this set and show diagnosis, which sets the diagnosis, and then it calls perform with segue identifier. And since we have no show diagnosis segue in our iPad storyboard, it crashes. Okay? Well, anytime you try to do a segue, named segue that doesn't exist, it will raise an exception in your application. Okay, so how do we fix this? Well, on this split view, you can see we've got both things on screen at the same time, so we don't really need to segue. We can just send a message right over there. So let's just do that. So how are we going to do that? We need to do something like have a method that, let's call it split view happiness view controller. Okay, which gets our happiness view controller from the split view. Now, again, we can have all kinds of if iPad, then get this, blah, blah, blah. But instead, I'm just going to create this split view happiness view controller method, and then I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to do the implementation of it. I'm going to say split view happiness view controller. And I'm going to say, I'm just going to go happiness view controller equals self.split view controller. View controllers, last object. Now, that's going to get me the detail view controller, right? Y'all agree with that? If I'm in a split view. Otherwise, it's going to return nil, because self.split view controller can be nil. You send a message to nil, it's all nil, nil, nil. Okay, so that's good. But I'm also going to be a little careful here. I'm going to make sure that this is a happiness view controller. Okay? And if it's not, actually I'm going to say if it's not, then I'm going to set it to nil. Oops. Nil. And then I'm going to return it. So this method that I created, split view happiness controller, returns nil unless the detail side of the split view controller I'm in is a happiness view controller. So you see how I've put a lot of kind of testing and making sure this, preparing and making this general all-in-one method. Right? So here I'm just saying, if that thing exists, then just send it a message to update its happiness. Okay? Now hopefully we implemented our set happiness in our view controller to do a set needs display, which we did. Ooh, are we smart? Yes. Okay? All right, this should be else. Yeah. Right, so we don't want to segue if we found the controller. We don't want to segue, so I need an else there. Good job. So let's see that. Be careful not to disconnect my wires here. All right, so now let's go to Dr. Freud, and he's happy, he's sad. Okay, steal apple by taking out medium. Okay, so that's the target action way of doing it, and you can see it requires no segueing. Okay? Now, Dr. Pill is a little bit different, because here we had the serious problem has a different scene here. It has that little extra button at the bottom. Go to Dr. Pill's website. So here we're going to leave our segueing in. So what is that? Well, actually, you know, we're a little short on time. First thing I'm going to do actually is fix this problem. All right, let's go back to Dr. Freud. Let me show you the problem. All right, we have this. It's nice. When I rotate to portrait, I got a problem. I can no longer talk to Dr. Freud. Okay, I have to go back to here. And this is generally not good UI to force people to go into landscape to use the UI. Okay, so we need to do this toolbar thing. All right, so let's do the toolbar and do the split view controller delegate to make it so that when we rotate here, along the top we're going to get a toolbar with a little button that will bring up the left-hand side here. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so there's a kind of a first question of delegates is where are you going to put the delegate? And I'm going to put my delegate in, believe it or not, this rotatable view controller. Okay, I'm going to make that rotatable view controller be the split views delegate. Now, why would I do that? The reason is that that view controller is always on screen. Okay, we know that in Dr. Pill, when I press serious problem, it's going to replace the right-hand side. So I really can't use the right-hand side. In Dr. Freud, it would all be fine, except we have Dr. Pill. So here, this guy, the left-hand side of this is always going to be on screen, or not on screen, but always in the split view controller, somewhere in the navigation stack or whatever. So that's the one I'm going to use. Now, rotatable view controller is a generic view controller. Remember I said I wanted to keep it generic, and I'm going to do this generically too. I'm going to make it be a split view controller generically. So how am I going to do that? All right, let's start with what the methods are, the split view controller methods are. And also I should go up here and I'm going to publicly pronounce that I am a UI split view controller delegate. Okay, that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to make my rotatable view controller, which I hope to be a reusable object. I'm advertising to the world, yeah, you can use me as a split view delegate. If you said, you know, if you put me in a split view, I'm going to try and be its delegate. So let's go back here. The first thing maybe I want to do is this awake from nib. And I'm going to call super awake from nib. Probably not strictly necessary, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to say self.splitViewController.delegate equals self. So whenever I come out of a storyboard, I'm going to make myself the delegate of any split view I'm in. Okay? So I'm going to try to be the split view delegate if I can. Now, if someone else comes along later and sets themselves to be the split view delegate, that might be taken away from me, and that's fine. But when I first come out of the storyboard, if I'm in a split view delegate, I'm going to try and be the delegate. Okay? All right, so what are the methods? You remember that there's this one bool, split view controller should hide view controller in orientation. I'll make it so you can see this a little better. Okay. One way I could fix this problem right away is just say return no. In other words, never hide the left-hand side. So let's just run that and see if that fixes our problem. And you're going to see that it does in a fashion. All right, so here we are. This is good. We rotate. Hey, we don't have any problems. We still have it on the left side. Now, it doesn't look very good. Kind of face is really, really small. If I go here, it's still working. But this is really not as nice as if it made this face big and we had the little button in the corner where you could bring it up. Okay? But that is an option if you want, just to return no from this method. Okay, what about the other methods? There's only two of them that we're going to look at today. One is the one that gets called when it wants you to put a button on screen. Okay? That's called, oh, that's not this one. Split view, that's this one right here, will hide view controller. I'll also spread this one out so you can see it. My mouse, there it is, that thing, this thing, and this one. So you can see that it's giving me a bar button item and saying, hey, I'm going to hide the left-hand side view controller. Please tell me, please take this button and put it somewhere on screen so that I can get it back. So there's two things I want to do here. One, I'm going to set the bar button item's title to be my title. I'm trying to be generic here, this rotatable view controller. So whatever my title is, I'm going to assume that's a good title to put in that little button. Okay? It's an assumption, a generic assumption. May or may not work in certain circumstances. The title of the view controller that the rotatable thing in is psychologist. That's a pretty good word for us, so hopefully that'll work out. And then what I need to do is tell the detail view to put this button up. Okay? We're going to talk about how we do that in a second. And then the other method is split view controller will show view controller. And I'll make this look nice too. You can see it. Scroll down. So this is saying, please remove this bar button item because I'm putting that left-hand side of the split view back on. So here I'm going to say, tell the detail view to take the button away. Okay, so how am I going to implement this? Because I'm a generic rotatable view controller, how am I going to talk to my detail view and tell it to put this button on? There's no method there that says, put a button in your toolbar. Okay, that's not a generic method in UI view controller. Well, how do we talk between objects when we're trying to be generic? Anyone know? Sorry? Delegates, yeah, or even more generally, protocols. Right? That's what the protocol, Objective-C protocol is. So this is a great place to show you another example of where you might use a protocol. So I'm going to create a protocol which is set your split view bar button item to this. And then I'm going to make it so that their detail view controller implements that. And if it does implement it, if it implements a protocol, I'll be able to do this. If it doesn't, I'll just keep returning no from that other method. Okay? So I'm going to try my best as a generic rotatable view controller to do the right thing. So how do I create a protocol? I go up here to File, New File, like we always do. And you'll see here at the Cocoa Touch level at the top that there's something even called Objective-C Protocol. Right? Just here's a class, and so there's a protocol. So I'll click a protocol. I'm going to call this the, what did I say to call this? The split view. It's a long name. It's called the split view bar button item presenter protocol. Okay? So good long names are good. It's only bad the first time you have to type them. So this is going to be a protocol that sets the bar button item associated with a split view. So I'm going to make sure it's in the right place, which it is. And this creates a file. It's just a header file that has this @sign protocol. And I'm just going to add one property to it, non-atomic strong, UI bar button item, split view bar button item. Okay, so that's it. This is UI kit instead of foundation kit because the bar button item stuff is in the UI kit. So that's it. So I'm going to make it so that anybody who implements this split view bar button item presenter protocol, any detail view, can present that button for me, okay, and take it away. It's really simple. So let's go back to our rotatable view controller. How would we do this? Okay, first I'm going to create a nice little method here using this protocol. So let's go ahead and import the protocol, split view presenter. And I'm going to copy and paste here. I probably didn't even need to do that. I'm going to call this my split view bar button item presenter. Yeah, presenter. Okay. So this is going to be a method where on the rotatable view controller where I'm going to get my detail view if it's a bar button item presenter. So I'm just going to say id detail vc equals self dot split view controller dot view controllers. And again, if I'm not in a split view, this is all just going to do nothing because these things are all going to return nil. And here's another introspection thing I think I might have showed you before. This is how you check if something conforms to a protocol. Okay? If detail vc conforms to protocol, @sign protocol, the name of your protocol. So split view bar button item presenter. Okay? And I'm going to do the exact same thing I did in the other one, actually. I'm going to say if not, then the detail VC is nil, because I'm looking for a detail VC that does it. And then I'm going to say detail VC. So do you all see how this method returns my detail view as long as it implements that protocol? If it doesn't, it returns nil. And so I'm going to do nothing. And in fact, if it doesn't, I'm going to go right here. I'm going to say if my bar button item presenter is nil, then I'm going to return no all the time. So I'm not even going to do the little button, try to do the button thing. I'm just going to put both the left and right on at the same time, unless I have a presenter. If I have a presenter. But if I have a presenter, I don't really want to always show the button. I only want to do it in portrait. So here's where I might say UI interface orientation is portrait. Right? Everyone understand that line of code? I'm just checking to see if my detail view can play the button dance. And if it can do the button dance, then in portrait, I'll do the button dance. Otherwise, if it can't do the button dance, I'm never going to do the button dance. Okay? All right, so how would we implement this? Well, this actually ends up being one line of code. I'm just going to say self split view presenter, and I'm going to look back at this protocol, right? This protocol has one property, which is this thing right here. I'm just going to set that property. I'm going to set it equal to the bar button item. And similarly, when it's time to take the bar button away, I'm just going to set this thing to nil. That's it. That's all I have to do in the rotatable view controller. Because he's working together with another object blindly through the protocol to do the work. Because only the detail view controller can actually put the thing on screen. It can't. And again, if this thing returns nil, remember that if you send a message to nil, and this is just the getter of a property, it just does nothing. So this line of code will do nothing if I don't have a complicit detail view controller. Are we cool with that? All right, but now I do have to go to my detail view controller, my happiness view controller, and implement that. Now, this probably wants to be, the fact that it implements that probably wants to be in its public header file. In other words, the happiness view controller wants to tell the world that I am a split view bar button item presenter. So sometimes we put the declaration that you do a certain protocol in the private header file, and sometimes in the public. We do it in the private when it's just part of our private implementation. We do it in the public when we're going to advertise to other objects, hey, I'm willing to do this. Okay? So I'm going to do that. So this is automatically going to cause me to have to implement that method. Because I say I implement this protocol, the protocol is the property in the protocol rather is required, so I have to implement it. So if I go over here to happiness view controller, in fact, if I try to build here, I should probably get a warning. Not sure why it didn't give me a warning right away, but yeah, see, I'm getting a warning here that I'm not implementing the setter and getter. So let's make it synthesize here. Split view bar button item equals underbar split view bar button item. All right, so that's good. Now, for us to put that bar button item on screen, we need a toolbar, right? Because we've got to have somewhere. Right now, we're just a face view. So we need a toolbar. So let's go back to our iPad storyboard. I'm only going to do this on iPad. Okay? Doesn't make sense to go do this on iPhone as well. And let's go over to our happiness view controller, which is this gigantic guy right here. And let's put a toolbar in here. So I'm going to go up and put the toolbar on the top. So I'm going to take the face view and make some room here. Then I'm just going to go to my object library, scroll down to toolbar. By the way, the thing here says provides a mechanism for displaying a toolbar at the bottom of the screen, but a toolbar can also be used at the top. Okay? When you drag items out, be careful not to make them subviews of other views. Do you see if I try to drop this here, it's going to make it a subview of my face view. Do you see how the rectangle that's enclosing is small? Whereas here, it's going to be at the top level view. Guys see the difference? Can you see it okay there? It might be hard to see, but I'm sure I don't want to put it in my face view. So I'm going to put it right up here, like that. Probably I want to set it struts and springs. I don't want it to stick to the bottom. I want it to stick to the top. I want to readjust my face view to fit the whole rest of the screen. So now I got my toolbar. I don't want this item in here. Okay, the only thing I'm going to use my toolbar for is to put the bar button item in. So let's get rid of that. And I'm going to need an outlet to it. Right? So let's go over here and create an outlet for it. property, non-atomic, weak, IB outlet, UI toolbar, call it toolbar. All right, so let's wire that up. Okay, I could do it by control dragging to the code, but you remember you can also do it by going down here, and this is going to be quite a challenge. Watch this. Control. There it is. Drag, so we can control drag, and here's an outlet toolbar. So now I got the toolbar I want. The only thing I need to do now is when this split view bar button item property is set in me, I need to put that thing on screen. And this is the code that I showed you in the slides. And if it's set to nil, I need to remove it. Okay, so that's very straightforward. I'm just going to have the set split view bar button item thing here. Sure I don't forget anything here. I'm going to, first of all, anytime I'm going to do something that might cause drawing, I'm going to try and avoid it if I can by saying if it's not being set to something new, then I'll do this. Okay? So that's something that's nice to do because drawing is not cheap. So then let's get my toolbar. Actually, I don't even need to do that. Let's just go, let's get the toolbar's items. So I'm going to get a mutable array, which is, I'll call toolbar items, which is self.toolbar. That's the thing we just created. Items. Items is the array of UI bar button items in the toolbar we just created that outlet to. And I'm going to make a mutable copy because I need to modify this thing. Okay, are we cool with that? Then I'm just going to say if this split view bar button that's already there is there, then I'm going to remove it. Oops. Toolbar items, remove that. Okay, so that's going to get it out of there. Sorry. Let's make some more room again. All right, and if the new one that I just got passed is not nil, then let's add it, and let's add it over on the left. Okay. Index 0 is the left. In your toolbar, it's items. The left one is 0, and it goes up from there. And that's all I need to do. I just need to set my self.toolbar.items equals this mutable toolbar items I just modified. And of course, I want to set my split view bar button item there. Okay? So that's it. So hopefully, it should do it. All right. So that didn't work. Why didn't that work? Let's see here. Sorry. Okay, did I forget something? Toolbar. Oh, I know. Totally. Let's go down here to happiness. When I did toolbar, see, this is the problem. If you ignore your warnings, bam. So there's a warning right here telling me, hey, bud, synthesize your toolbar. So let's do that. How about that? I did that on purpose so that you'd know to check your warnings. Live demos, they're awesome if you're the demo E. All right, so here we go. We got this. Let's see if this works. All right, so I'm in landscape mode. Okay, all working fine. What happens if I go portrait? Bingo, we got a little button in the corner. And if I click that, there it is. And if I click down here, it still works. Okay. Now, we're out of time, so I can't do Dr. Pill. Okay, but I'm going to post the code for Dr. Pill. It's more rare to do the Dr. Pill way, so which is why I don't feel too bad that I'm not going to be able to get to it in an in-class demo, but I'll post the code. The way we did target action is the #1 way. So now you know everything you need to know for your homework. You're going to use target action to talk between your master and your detail, not replace, so don't worry about the replace. If you have questions, I'm here as always.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.